July 16, 2016, Saturday of the 15th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of the prophet Micah. Woe to those who plan iniquity and work out evil on their couches. In the morning light they accomplish it when it lies within their power. They covet fields and seize them, houses and they take them. They cheat an owner of his house, a man of his inheritance. Therefore thus says the Lord, Behold, I am planning against this race an evil from which you shall not withdraw your necks, nor shall you walk with head high, for it will be a time of evil. On that day a satire shall be sung over you, and there shall be a plaintive chant. Our ruin is complete. Our fields are portioned out among our captors. The fields of my people are measured out, and no one can get them back. Thus you shall have no one to mark out boundaries by lot in the assembly of the Lord. The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, Do not forget the poor, O Lord. Why, O Lord, do you stand aloof? Why hide in times of distress? Proudly the wicked harass the afflicted, who are caught in the devices the wicked have contrived. Do not forget the poor, O Lord. For the wicked man glories in his greed, and the covetous blasphemes, sets the Lord at naught. The wicked man boasts, he will not avenge it. There is no God, sums up his thoughts. Do not forget the poor, O Lord. His mouth is full of cursing, guile, and deceit. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He lurks in ambush near the villages. In hiding he murders the innocent. His eyes spy upon the unfortunate. Do not forget the poor, O Lord. You do see, for you behold misery and sorrow, taking them in your hands. On you the unfortunate man depends. Of the fatherless you are the helper. Do not forget the poor, O Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The Pharisees went out and took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. When Jesus realized this, he withdrew from that place. Many people followed him, and he cured them all, but he warned them not to make him known. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through Isaiah the prophet. Behold my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom I delight. I shall place my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not contend or cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory. And in his name the Gentiles will hope. The Gospel of the Lord.
July 16th, Saturday of the 15th week in Ordinary Time, the Memorial of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The first reading comes from Micah 2, 1-5. Micah was more or less a contemporary of Isaiah, but he was different from Isaiah in that Isaiah preached in the city of Jerusalem. Isaiah considered Jerusalem to be the place where God would reveal his goodness, where Micah preached in a small town, and he considered the people of Jerusalem and the values of Jerusalem to be false, because Jerusalem was a big city and he was a small town boy. He had small town values. Like Isaiah, however, especially in the early chapters of Isaiah, Micah also condemns the social injustice that he sees around him. He speaks of those who spend the entire night thinking of the evil things they can do the next morning. They seize the fields, they take the houses, they even put people into slavery. This was something that he himself had witnessed in the countryside, that at the time of Micah, people are building up these large plantations, and they do it in a very terrible way. Whenever there's a failure of the crop, they demand a guarantee for loans that are made to the farmers. Well, when the person can't pay the guarantee, then they would first of all take the animals, then they would take the land, and eventually they demand that the people be sold into slavery. Because of their wickedness, because of the way that they treat these poor people, they themselves would not have a measure when the day of the Lord came. That the Lord would reject them and not treat them with kindness. Remember, these are people who were rich and thought that God had blessed them with riches because God considered them to be special. And instead of using their riches to help others, they were using it for their own self-aggrandizement. Because of this, they would have nothing. The Gospel is from Matthew 12, 14 to 21. We hear that Jesus is doing many good things, but the Pharisees are plotting against him. They hate him because Jesus has been telling the truth, and the last thing they want to hear is the truth. They want to hear their own interpretations. They believe that they have a monopoly on the truth. Well, Matthew has to show that Jesus' way is the right way, because many people thought that the Pharisees were given the seat of Moses. Therefore, they were given the authority to interpret what it meant to be a Jew. Instead, Matthew shows by quoting the Old Testament that Jesus is the fulfillment of what God had predicted about the Messiah. And in this particular case, he shows that Jesus fulfills the prophecies that were said about the suffering servant. Remember that the songs of the suffering servant are 4 poems that are found in chapters 40 to 55 of Isaiah, that passage that was written during the exile. These poems were probably not written by this prophet himself. It's a different vocabulary, but they were clearly incorporated into 2nd Isaiah's message, because 2nd Isaiah produces a frame around the poem which anchors the poem into the text. The poems speak about a servant of God who would suffer for the sins of the people, but who would respond to the violence used against him with meekness. He wouldn't shout, he wouldn't fight, his voice wouldn't be heard in the streets, and yet he would lead the people to truth, to victory, not by violence, but rather by love. It is love that truly conquers evil. In this, we have to remember that evil, according to St. Augustine, isn't something that exists. It's an absence of goodness, an absence of love. And the way to destroy evil is not through violence, not by using its own means, but rather by loving. And therefore, the love destroys that void, fills in that which is lacking with itself. And may God bless us.